Hello friends, it's Lisa, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in June. Before we get into it, a couple disclaimers. You probably can tell by my appearance. It's a very hot day today. I basically haven't stopped sweating, so if you're wondering what that glow is on my skin, it's called sweat. And I just feel very like frazzled. I feel like just in general, like on an everyday basis, my brain is mush, but then when the warm weather hits, it's like even worse. So this wrap up might be a bit of a mess. I'm gonna try my best to explain my thoughts, but you know, I'm making no promises that this is gonna be a clear and concise wrap up with great reviews, but that's not why you people come here, I hope. I hope that's not why you watch me. We all know that's not why. Oh, Sam's jumping down from the window. Hello! Also, you probably can hear a fan in the background. This is just the reality of filming in summer, so I'm sorry. But anyway, let's chat about the books. You don't care about any of that. I just feel like I need to explain myself. So I read 10 books in the month of June, which I'm really proud of. I was definitely feeling kind of slumpy the past few months, and this is the first month, I think, since February where I've reached double digits of books read, so that I feel like I'm proud of for myself. And most of these books as well, I do have vlogs for, so if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts, I will have like every vlog from the month linked below, so you can probably get some better thoughts, because like I said, right now, I don't know what's about to happen. I'm probably not gonna be making much sense, so let's just get into the wrap-up, shall we? So the first book that I read in the month of June was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which I'm sure you've seen kind of everywhere. It's getting talked about a lot, which I think is so great, and I think like what the intent was, it was to get a conversation started. So in this book, you are following the perspective of a character named June, and she has this like friend who's not really a friend. They're kind of like frenemies. I feel like there's no better term to use to describe them, and I feel like I haven't said the word frenemies in probably like 10 years, if I've ever said it. Like that just like brought me back. But basically they are both authors and they went to the same college and were in a lot of the same classes, and there was this like friendship but also kind of unspoken rivalry between them, even if it was just one-sided on June's perspective. And June feels slighted by Athena and just by the world in general, because Athena has had a slightly more successful career as an author than June has. Her debut did really well and she has like movie adaptations happening, and June's debut didn't do as well as Athena's, and she kind of feels bitter about that. So when June witnesses Athena's death in this freak accident, June takes this opportunity to steal a just finished like first draft of Athena's next novel that Athena hasn't told anyone about, and June takes that, she ends up reworking it a little bit and then publishing it as her own book. So this book is really just following June as she gets all of this fame and attention for this book, and her kind of having to deal with the guilt that she feels about stealing this manuscript, but also how she continues to justify what she did. And we're also seeing a look into the publishing industry and the very like racist, problematic things that are happening behind the scenes. And that was something that I thought was really interesting about this book, was the fact that it was highlighting these things. I think, you know, there's a lot of stuff that feels like, as someone who, you know, reads books and is a part of the community and reviews books but is not on the publishing side, it was interesting to see things that I'm like, there's no way this is happening behind the scenes, and see it actually happening. Like it's crazy to see characters who are very clearly real people. There are real people who act like this. There are real people who say these things and do these things and justify things in this way. And I think that was really displayed well when we see June go through this moment in the book where she is kind of being called out, because this whole manuscript basically was about Chinese laborers in World War I, which feels important to point out. I probably should have said that earlier. Like I said, this wrap-up's gonna be a mess. And June is a white author, so there is this kind of conversation on who has the right to tell what story, and there's a lot of like Twitter discourse about that in the book. So it was interesting to see it through that perspective and to see like how this publisher and how like June handled that situation and being called out in that way. And like, I don't know, it provided such an interesting perspective on the publishing industry. Some of it like I kind of knew what was going on, but there's a lot of stuff that behind the scenes obviously we don't know if you're not a part of it. So I really enjoyed that aspect. I also really liked when we would see a little bit into June and Athena's like friendship and their history, because I feel like that provided a lot of context to why June is justifying what she's doing. I wish we had gotten a little bit more about their relationship personally. That's where I felt like I wanted more from this book. I wanted to see more of their friendship, or not friendship, because they're, like I said, like frenemies. But I thought that that was so interesting, and I really like wanted to explore, I think, that relationship a little bit more. Those parts that we did get were really interesting, so I wanted it to be a little bit more than what we got. And also this book takes a bit of like a thriller turn towards the end, and I like I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, but I will say this book was so hard to put down. I feel like a lot of people are saying that about this book. I listened to the audiobook and I think I listened to most of it in one day because I just couldn't stop listening to it. This is just one of those books that kind of keeps you reading, keeps you on your toes, keeps you wanting to know what is going to happen next. I do think like once I kind of took a step back from it, once I like stopped reading it, I was like, yeah, there definitely were parts that dragged for me, but I feel like for the most part, it's definitely something that just keeps you wanting to read, and it's so easy to just get sucked in and read it all in one sitting, basically. So I really enjoyed this. I definitely think it was a interesting look and an important look at the publishing industry, and I feel like if you are an author or someone who works in publishing at all, this is like a must read. Hello? Brief intermission for me and my father to talk about lunch. Anyways, so then after Yellowface, I decided to pick up Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. I knew that this was a second chance romance, which I keep saying. I feel like I've said this so many times. I am a broken record that I am not a second chance romance girly. The only reason I thought maybe I could become one is because I read Happy Place by Emily Henry and loved it, and that is second chance romance. I was like, you know what? This book has so many people who are obsessed with it. Why don't I give it a go? So this is, like I said, a second chance romance. We're following Macy and Elliot, and when they were teenagers, I think when they were like 13, 14 years old, Macy and her dad move into this beach house, I think, that is next door to Elliot and his family. So we see this book through dual timelines, and we see Macy and Elliot as they're teenagers becoming really good friends, maybe more, and just like that relationship that they have as teenagers that becomes so important to them. And then we also have the present day where they have not seen each other since they were 18 years old. It's been 11 years since they've seen each other, and in the current day they run into each other for the first time in those 11 years, and we see them start to reconnect. Obviously, because of what had happened when they were younger, there's a lot of difficulties within that relationship that they have in the current day. So this book is really just leading up to what happened when they were younger and can they move past it now that they're adults. And I did not like this. The second chance romance trope really is just, I just think I need to give up. You know, there's so many that I want to read and I'm intrigued by, but it just doesn't typically work for me, and this is no exception. I honestly don't even think it's so much the second chance romance trope that I didn't like, because I actually did like the dual timeline part of this book. I think it was balanced really well. I feel like we spent an appropriate amount of time in both timelines where I felt like I understood and connected, I guess, to the characters in both timelines. Something that I've read, you know, in other books, in other second chance romance books even, there's been dual timelines, and I feel like there's a disconnect between the past timeline and the present timeline, but this, like, the characters felt the same in both, like they felt like themselves. There was a consistency within their characters there. And to be honest, most of this book, I thought it was fine. I wasn't loving it by any means, but I was like not having the worst time listening to the audiobook. I didn't feel super connected with the characters, which is why, like, for a romance, this wasn't really working for a majority of it. Like, I felt like fine towards Macy, like she was fine. Elliot, for some reason, kinda, I don't know what it was, but he was not, I was not vibing with him, and I know that that's gonna upset some people because people love him, but I can't put my finger on it. Something about him just didn't vibe with him. And then there was the reveal as to what happened when they were teenagers that kind of caused them to not speak. And there was a part of it where I was like, oh, that's like devastating, and I kind of cried. Like, that was one thing about this book. I gave this 2.5 stars, by the way. I gave it that extra half because there was a part of the conflict that was unexpected and made me cry, and for that reason I gave it that extra half star because I'm a generous queen. But the thing with the conflict, and I don't know how to describe what I'm saying without getting into spoilers, but I will try my best. I feel like the way they wrote the conflict, there's a conversation that needed to be had about that conflict, and that's just not the way the book went. That's not how it was explained. That's not how this particular situation was described, and I felt uncomfortable by that. I don't know. I didn't like it. I feel like the conflict was going a certain way. Like, I was kind of anticipating it to go kind of the way that it went, but it somehow was even worse because of how the authors decided to describe this event. I just, no, wasn't a fan, didn't like it. Also didn't love that there were like smutty scenes when they were teenagers. I mean, I think they were like, they might have both been 18. I know Elliot was 18. I don't remember how old Macy was. She was either 17 or 18, but it was still a little weird for me. I'm not gonna lie. I know that happens with teenagers, but like, this is an adult romance book. I don't know. It was kind of weird for me. So yeah, didn't really love the way that the conflict was handled. I could talk about the spoilers, I guess. I will put a timestamp and like spoilers on the screen, so you can just skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled for what happens. Basically, Macy like goes to a party and sees Elliot like naked with another girl and assumes that he cheated on her, which is a fair assumption. And the way that it's explained is that Elliot was so drunk that he thought the girl that he slept with was Macy. That doesn't feel like a good explanation, because like, if he was that drunk, like, clearly he could not give consent. So there is an issue on behalf of how that, like, what happened to him. And I thought, like, as adults, they would maybe recognize, like, how he was put in that situation and what actually happened to him and call it for what it was. But they didn't. And I'm like, that doesn't seem responsible. I don't know. Didn't love that. I feel like if the roles were reversed and that happened to Macy, we would be having that conversation, right? Like, I don't know. I didn't like that. Wasn't a fan. I feel like there needed to be a conversation about that, and that just wasn't even brought up at all. So yeah, didn't love this. 2.5 stars. Honestly, I've heard such mixed things on basically every other Christina Lauren book, so I don't know if I'm gonna be checking out more of their books other than like The Unhoneymooners. I feel like everyone likes that book for the most part. I have seen some mixed things, but I feel like mostly that is a book that is well loved, so I might check that one out. But honestly, I don't know if Christina Lauren is necessarily gonna be an author duo that's for me. But yeah, 2.5 stars. And I'm sorry, because I know people love this book. So then the next book I picked up was Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Fairies. This is by Heather Fawcett. And this was also a 5-star prediction for me this year. So just keep that in mind. But I read this for my Speak Now rating vlog. I read books that were recommended for Speak Now fans or based off of Speak Now, so I will have that linked below because I'm sure my thoughts in that video will probably make more sense than they will right now. So this is a historical fantasy type of book where we're following Emily Wilde, who is writing an encyclopedia about fairies, and she goes to this particular village to do research on a certain group of fairies, a certain type of fairies. And she goes there to start doing this research, but then her academic rival Wendell shows up, which I love. I can't get over his name being Wendell. It's just such a cute name. Like, how can your rival be named Wendell? It's just too precious. But he shows up and she is not about it until he offers to kind of help her with her research. So the two of them kind of take on this journey to research about the fairies in this town and also like become closer with the people within this village. And they get into a lot of shenanigans throughout their research process. Like I said, I talked about this in my Speak Now vlog, so I'm not going to talk about it too much in depth in this video, but I also gave this 2.5 stars. Great! Remember when I said this was a 5-star prediction? Yeah. It was not 5 stars. I was very wrong. Basically, this book is completely told through this like diary sort of format. We are basically reading Emily's like field notes on the fairies and what she gets up to when she's in this village. And it becomes more personal as Wendell shows up and they start having these certain experiences and they start to maybe develop feelings for one another. So it kind of is like research notes that she's taking, but also a mix of a diary, and it's like we're reading her diary. And that format just did not work for me. With that format, it should have felt more personal. I should have felt more connected to Emily, but I did not at all. I didn't feel super connected to any of the characters. And because of this writing style, because she's writing in her diary and that's what we're reading, every time something would happen, I would be like, oh, well, clearly everything is fine, and they get out of this situation because she's writing in her diary. Like, she makes it out in order to be able to write in her diary. So nothing that happened felt like there was any stakes at all, which also prevented me from getting invested in anything happening in the characters. And also this book, nothing really happens in the first half. It is super boring. You only get like an exciting piece of information at about the halfway point, and then things start happening from there. But then the things that are happening, it's like, what is going on? There's no stakes to anything, and it really did not work for me at all. I don't think that this is a bad book. I just think that this wasn't for me. So then I ended up picking up the audiobook for The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. I know, a thriller. Who is she? But in this book, you're following Alex, who has been trying to make it as an author for a very long time. And then she gets this opportunity to attend this writing retreat that is hosted by her all-time favorite author. Basically, this author is like the reason she got into writing. So she obviously jumps at this chance and this opportunity. And where this author lives and where this writing retreat is happening is very secluded, and there's only like the woman who's running it, like a few people that like help her run her estate, and then the 5 girls that were chosen to attend this writing retreat. And Alex kind of goes into this writing retreat knowing it's going to be a bit tough because her ex-best friend has also been accepted into this writing retreat program, but then they get there and what is expected of them in regards to this book that they have to write during this writing retreat is a lot more than what they asked for, and there's a little bit more like sinister things happening behind the scenes, and the stakes for them writing these manuscripts become higher and higher. And I feel like this is the type of book that I don't recommend reading the description, at least on Goodreads, because I feel like it gives way too much away. I didn't read the Goodreads description before going into this book, and I'm so happy that I did, because there were a lot of things that happened that I didn't expect but are literally in the description, and also some of the things in the description that are the exciting things happening don't happen until halfway through the book. So I just recommend not reading the description. So I actually came out of this book kind of enjoying it. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, which for me in thrillers, that's basically high praise. I just don't have the best luck with thrillers. It's not a genre that I feel like I typically enjoy, but there are certain books within the genre that capture my interest and make me want to read them, and this is one of them. I think the whole premise of this writing retreat just sounded really interesting, so I wanted to check it out, and I did like it. It is a bit silly, it is a bit over the top. There are things that happen that are extremely predictable. I feel like I predicted where this book was gonna go basically the whole time, but it was just so over the top and so silly that I had a good time. Like I was saying, there are certain things that don't start happening until the halfway point. It does take a while to get into the exciting parts of this book, but I feel like once you do, it's so bonkers that it's like kind of fun to read. I definitely don't think this is gonna work for everybody, but I had a good time. I also think I enjoy the like secluded setting in a thriller. I feel like the ones that I have read when we've had that kind of secluded off on your own kind of setting, those are the ones I've liked. So I feel like I want to read more thrillers if I continue to read thrillers that have that setting. But yeah, I don't know. I gave it 3.5 stars, so it's not like it's a book that I absolutely loved. I already like at this point, it's been maybe a few weeks since I listened to the audiobook, and I've already kind of forgotten a lot of why I enjoyed this book and like just kind of little details. Like it isn't something that I think that's gonna stick with me, but it was fun in the moment and I had a silly goofy time with it. All right, next I ended up picking up another 5-star prediction for this year. I realized I was kind of slacking in reading my 5-star predictions for the year, so I picked up another and I read Ophelia After All by Racquel Marie. This is a YA contemporary like coming of age novel. We're following Ophelia, who has always been very sure of herself and what she likes. She has this really solid friendship group. She also is really obsessed with gardening, and she also has always been obsessed with boys. But throughout this book, we see Ophelia end up getting a crush on a girl, and that causes her to question everything she knew about herself, and we see her go on this journey of discovering things about herself and questioning everything she thought she knew, on top of, you know, this friendship group kind of having some problems, because this book is throughout her senior year. It's the lead up to prom, and because of different things happening and the prom and dates and all of this, there are things that happen and drama that happens between this group of friends, and I just really enjoyed this because it felt like a very real like teen experience. And this book, like I came out of it just feeling really overwhelmed with the fact that I was so happy that this book exists for teens and young adults to read, to have this representation in a coming of age novel, to see themselves represented, I think is so important and just makes me so happy. So I'm just really happy that this book exists. I loved all the conversations about sexuality and all these different labels, and having comfort in the fact that you know what you are and realizing that you are not alone, but also realizing like you might not know, you might not fit into a label, or you might not know what label is correct for you, and that's okay and valid as well. I also really enjoyed the like friendship dynamic in this book. I thought it was very real. I feel like the teens in this book acted like teens. They acted messy. They didn't always say and do the right things, and sometimes they handled things poorly, but it felt very real, and the conversations that they would have together I thought also seemed very realistic. So yeah, I enjoyed this. I'm just so happy it exists and people can see themselves represented in a coming of age novel, along with some really fun characters and some fun dynamics as well. I ended up giving this 4 stars. It just didn't give me that 5-star feeling, so another 5-star prediction where I was wrong, but I still really enjoyed this, and I highly recommend if you haven't read it already. I know this was a pretty popular book last year, so there's a good chance you might have read it already, but if not, I highly recommend picking it up. And now we have a lunch break mid-filming. See you in a moment. Alright, lunch has been consumed, camera battery charged a little bit. I now have some lemonade. Let's get back into this. Ooh, so the next book that I ended up picking up in June was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. You know that dragon book that you've been seeing everywhere? That one. I don't spill that lemonade, I will be so proud of myself. Anyway, but Fourth Wing is the first book in this new series. It's like a new adult fantasy romance series, and we have Violet as our main character. And within this world, there is this military academy, and within that, they split off into quadrants. So Violet has been preparing her whole life to be in the scribe quadrant, you know, reading books, living her bookish, quiet life. But her mother, who also happens to be the commanding general, is like, that's funny, our whole family basically have been riders, so you gotta go to the rider quadrant. So Violet now has to prepare and train to be a dragon rider, which is not at all what she has been preparing her whole life for. And preparing to be a dragon rider is a very brutal and violent and life-threatening training situation to begin with, but then also within the rider quadrant, there are lots of people who want to kill everybody. It's a highly competitive quadrant because there are more people who are training to become riders than there are dragons, and dragons have to pick a rider to bond with. So a lot of these people who are training are trying to like take other people who are training out so that there's less competition. And because Violet is the commanding general's daughter, she already kind of has a target on her back, but there are people who are within the riders quadrant who have been marked as traitors. Their parents were a part of a rebellion that happened years and years and years ago, so now the kids of them, as like punishment, are now marked as traitors and have to go through this riders training. And like I said, this is a fantasy romance, so you know that the romance has to come in somewhere. There is a particular guy named Xaden who has been marked as a traitor. His father was kind of the head of this rebellion that happened years ago, and he particularly has his reasons for wanting Violet dead. So love that in a love interest, am I right? So basically this book, you're following Violet as she trains to become a dragon rider while also having a very big target on her back, and people are trying to kill her every 5 seconds. But this book is incredibly hyped up right now. It is literally everywhere. There's like no physical copies to be had anywhere. They're out of stock everywhere. Everyone's obsessed with this. So I was a little skeptical going into it just because of all the hype, but I'm not gonna lie, I get it. I'm with you all. It was so much fun. The thing is, this book was just so much fun, and it does have its flaws. I give this 4.5 stars. I couldn't quite commit to that 5-star rating, but I do feel like if I were to ever reread this book, I might just bump it up to a 5 and commit and just ignore my problems because I had so much fun with this book. I think my biggest issue just comes from the writing being very cringy at times, especially within the romance, and just like, I don't know, there were just some lines that was just like, really? Like, it was very cringy. I also sometimes found the writing kind of hard to follow, especially if it was describing a certain like trial that Violet and the other riders or people training to become riders had to go through. Sometimes I had a hard time picturing what was being described, and I don't know if that was just my fault or the writing, I don't know. But basically those were like my problems with this book. Other than that, I had such a fun time. Like, again, not a perfect book, but I had so much fun. The romance was true like enemies to lovers, and it was so much fun to read. And I also really just loved the whole aspect with the dragons, and when you bond with your dragons, you're able to like communicate with them like in your minds basically, and I loved that. I'm sure there's people who don't enjoy that. I know there's people who don't enjoy it and find it cheesy, but I loved it. I thought it was so much fun. I would actually die for the dragons that are in this book. I've also seen a lot of people comparing this book to Divergent, or like having like similarities to Divergent. Now, I never read those books. I only watched, I don't know how many movies there ended up being, but I think I've seen 2. There might only be 2. I didn't really like them, but like I definitely get the comparison, and I just feel like this book is the adult version of those YA like fantasy dystopians that we were all obsessed with like years ago. Like there's actually a TikTok filter that's like, it sorts you into the quadrant of like this military academy that you should be a part of, and it's just giving that like 2012 2013 era of like the YA fantasies and dystopians that were super popular. For that reason, it almost feels nostalgic in a way, even though it's a new world and new characters, but it has that familiarity still. Yeah, I don't know, I just had a really good time with this. I loved the characters, I loved the romance, I loved the dragons, I loved the military academy. I feel like I enjoy a military academy setting most times when I read it. So I don't know. I absolutely love this. I had such a good time with it. And there's going to be a sequel that's coming out later this year. So I'm glad we don't have to wait like a whole year for the next book, which is very exciting because the way that Fourth Wing ends, I need more. I need it right now. So I definitely get the hype with this one. And I also did read this, or finish like the second half of it in a 24-hour readathon. So I'll link that below because I probably talk about maybe some more in-depth thoughts in that vlog. And also in that 24-hour readathon, I started and finished Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson. I know. Are you proud of me for finally reading this. I have put this on a TBR, my summer TBRs for the past like 3 years, and I finally read it. But in this book, you're following Emily, who one day her best friend Sloane just kind of disappears. Her and her family are no longer at their house. They literally disappeared without a trace, and Emily like can't get in contact with her. She's not answering her phone. But then one day she gets a letter in the mail, and it's from Sloane, and it's a list of things that Emily has to complete. It's kind of like a bucket list sort of thing. And there are things on the list such as apple picking at night, dancing until dawn, kissing a stranger, going skinny dipping, things like that. At the end of this list, Sloane says, once you complete all these things, you have to tell me all about it. So Emily's like, okay, I complete this list, I find Sloane. So, enlisting the help of one of the guys that she goes to school with named, oh, I already forget his name, Frank. How can I forget Frank? But she gets Frank's help and some other friends that she makes along the way to kind of help her complete the things on this list. I love a good list in a book, so I thought it was really fun that each chapter kind of followed a different thing on this list that she had to complete. I also really enjoyed the like different friendships that kind of got created throughout this book, because Emily really only was friends with Sloane and didn't have many other friends outside of her, so it was fun to see her grow these connections with other people and see those friendships develop. And it was also just like a fun friendship group dynamic that we were reading about in this book. I did give this 3.5 stars. I honestly I thought this was a fun, silly, goofy time. It's set over the summer. I think all of Morgan Matson's books are set over the summer, so it was like the perfect thing to read at the start kind of summer. I actually think I read this, I did that 24-hour readathon on the first day of summer, so it literally was the start of summer. But yeah, it was just fun. It was a fun, light-hearted read, but it's not something that I think is going to really stick with me. I don't think I'm going to think about it very much beyond like this wrap-up, to be honest. There also is a part of the conflict that I don't really love. I feel like there is a particular thing that when it happens in a contemporary or romance kind of book, it's just not my favorite, and I don't always love the way it's like justified. So this was an instance of it being like kind of not great for me. But other than that, I had a good time. Frank, I can't believe I forgot his name because he was probably my favorite character in this book. He was such a little sweetie pie. Also his friend, who I don't remember the name of. Clearly, like I said, it's really not going to stick with me because I'm already forgetting character names. It was like they called him by his last name, so it wasn't a first name, but I don't remember. Collins. Was that his name? Yes. Collins. That was his last name, but that's what they call him. I liked his character also. So yeah, a fun, silly, goofy, like summer contemporary romance. It was fun. It was lighthearted, and you know, that was what I wanted in the moment. So it was perfect. A good palate cleanser, but nothing that I think is going to really like stick with me for a very long time. Clearly, as I'm already forgetting everything. And then the next book that I finished is another book I'm so excited to talk about. It is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I am obsessed with this book. So in this book, you're following Iris and Roman, who both work and are writers for this particular newspaper. But there is this promotion that only one of them can get. They're kind of rivals at this paper, competing for this promotion. And a big part of what they're writing about at this newspaper is this war that's going on. There is this war that's been initiated by the gods, and there are human people who are fighting on behalf of these gods, and Iris's brother actually goes to fight on one side of this war. And after a while, she doesn't hear from him, and she starts to write these letters to him, just hoping that they will get to him, and she will write them on her typewriter and put them under her wardrobe, and they're disappearing. And she's not quite sure where they're disappearing to, but it turns out that they are showing up under the wardrobe of her rival Roman Kit. So this book is seeing them be rivals at work, but they're forming this connection through these letters, and eventually the two of them get sent to be war correspondents, and so they are kind of at the forefront of these realities of this war and seeing how it's affecting these real people who are kind of living near these battlefields almost. And I just love this book so much. I definitely think this book focuses more on the romance between the characters. So if you're interested by the whole plot with like the battles and the, you know, war between the gods, it is an interesting part of the book, and I feel like that might play more of a role in the sequel, just where this book ended up, but it definitely focuses more on the romance between the characters, which I absolutely loved. This was one of those books that like almost instantaneously I felt so connected to the characters. I was so invested in their relationship. I loved it so much. I don't know what else to say. If I didn't already say, and if it hasn't been made obvious, I gave this 5 stars. I pretty much just haven't stopped thinking about this book. I loved the setting. I loved the characters. I loved the romance. I also loved a lot of the side characters that we got introduced to. Also, this war with the gods was really interesting, and there is a bit of a magical element to it all as well. So I don't know, it just just kind of has a lot of different things that I love in books. The historical setting, the romance between the characters, a little bit of magic. I don't know, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I feel like it's so hard for me sometimes to talk about books that I love, but it's so easy for me to talk about books that I don't like. I don't know why it's hard for me to sometimes put into words why I love books so much, but like this was one of them. I just loved it. I think I was just so surprised by my love for this book because the description for this book is kind of unassuming. Like, I went into it not really knowing fully what was going on, or more so what to expect from it, but I definitely think that this is going to be a book that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. It's definitely more character driven, so if you don't like the characters or get invested in their relationships or like who they are as people individually, I don't know if you'll enjoy this, but for me, I love a character driven book if I'm invested in the characters and their relationships and what's happening to them, and that was what happened with this book. So I think this just kind of checked a lot of boxes for me with what I want out of a book. So yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I cannot stop thinking about it. I cannot stop thinking about these characters, and I definitely think this is going to end up on like my favorites of the year. Alright, so the final 2 books that I read this month are both featured in my Speak Now reading vlog. So again, linked below if you want to hear all of my thoughts, but one of them is After I Do by Jenkins Reid. So this is one of her like backlisted titles. I think this might have even been like the second book that she published, and it's one of her more like romance focused books. So in this book you're following Lauren and Ryan, who met when they were in college and fell in love, and eventually, like, you know, they stay together for a while, they move out together, and they get a dog, and then they get married, and you're seeing their relationship at the beginning of this book and how long it has lasted. And now I think when this book kind of kicks off, they are like 9 years into their relationship. They've been married for a few years, but they're starting to fight a lot. They're starting to disagree. They're starting to be annoyed with one another, and their relationship doesn't look like the way it used to. And after a very, very significant fight, the two of them decide, like, we need to do something about this. So their plan is that they are going to take a year away from each other. They are not going to contact each other, see each other for a whole year, and do what they need to do in that time to figure out what they want from this relationship, whether they want to even get together at the end of the year again or not. So this book, you're in Lauren's point of view, and you're seeing her throughout this year without her husband and trying to figure out what she wants out of a relationship, kind of discovering things about herself. She spends a lot of time with her family throughout this novel and gets their perspectives on love and relationships, which was one of my favorite aspects of this book. Pretty much everyone in her family has a different view on love and relationships and what they want out of that, and they all do things differently. And I thought it was really cool to see the various types of relationships and love, and see that like there is no right way to do a relationship or to do these things. Like, different things work for different people want different things out of relationships and out of love, and there's no right way to do it. So I really loved that conversation, and yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be a book that really like sticks with me in the long run, but I did enjoy it. Like I said, I really loved that conversation about love and relationships. You know, I said this is one of her like romance focused books, and yes, Lauren and Ryan's relationship is like the focal point of this book. That's what stems, you know, Lauren having this self-discovery of like what she wants out of relationships and what love is to her and what she wants from that. And that all stems from the fact that they are together, but they've taken this year apart from one another. And, you know, love and relationships is such a focal point of the book, but you're not really seeing their relationship because this book, most of the time, they are not together. So it's not quite a typical romance, or I guess like a romance that I've typically read. So I don't really love it for the actual romance part of it. More so like the discussions surrounding romance, love, and relationships is what I loved about it. And I really liked the characters. I liked a lot of the side characters. And this is the 5th Jenkins Reid book that I have read, and it is the 5th one to make me cry. I have cried every single book I've read from her. I don't know if there will ever be a time where I read a book from her and I don't cry. And there's certain like moments within this book too that are just very emotional. So personally, they got to me. Yeah, I just really love her writing and the way she writes characters and the way that she writes on these different themes and discussions. I always feel like she just always gets me, and it just always like punches me in the gut. I always cry every time. So yeah, I definitely think of the Jenkins Reid books that I've read, this is probably my least favorite, but I still gave it a 4 star, so it's still a book that I enjoyed. I just don't think it's necessarily going to be something that I think about very much going forward, but I enjoyed it, and it made me emotional, like every Jenkins Reid does. And then the final book that I finished up in June was Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn Bayron. This is sort of a Cinderella reimagining, because in this world, Cinderella and Prince Charming and the fairy godmother and the whole story of Cinderella was a real event in history that really happened. They were real people, and this world has based a lot of their practices and laws off of that moment. So every year the king hosts this ball for women once they reach a certain age to go and find a suitor, and it's supposed to kind of replicate the Cinderella story. But the king in this world is kind of an awful person. The whole system with this ball is already messed up because a lot of these women enter marriages that they don't want to and aren't safe for them. A lot of these men are not great and don't treat their wives well. And then we have people within this kingdom like Sophia who don't want to marry a man at all. It's never like explicitly stated, but she is a lesbian. She wants to be with her bestie Erin, who she's in love with. She doesn't want to marry a man that is not what she wants, and she finds a lot of like these practices with this ball and everything to be very messed up. And so she kind of wants to take an opportunity to run away with Erin. She's trying to convince her like, we need to go, we need to run away, we need to get out of here. And it just kind of keeps not working until she's actually at the ball and she has an opportunity to run and to escape from this situation. So she takes it and she finds herself in Cinderella's mausoleum. And when she gets there, she runs into a character named Constance, who is the last remaining descendant of Cinderella and her stepsisters and is determined to kind of mess with this system and kind of ruin it, take the king down, and set a better future for everybody. So you're following Sophia and Constance as they work together to take the king down and to take this system down. And I really enjoyed this book. I thought the whole concept of Cinderella and that story being a real event and real people and like a real moment in history, I thought was such a fun take on a Cinderella like retelling. I think the thing with this book is I liked everything. I liked the characters, I liked the romance, I liked how Cinderella's story was told in this particular book, I liked how twisted and dark the whole world building in this book seemed to be. I liked everything, but I didn't love it. I feel like this book just didn't feel fully fleshed out. Nothing was given the amount of time that it needed to be. There were moments in this book where it was really slow, and then there were things that were rushed. So I don't know if this book just needed to be paced differently or it just needed to be a little longer, but I just feel like there were a lot of things that weren't given the time that they needed to be fully fleshed out to have the impact on me that it needed to have. There were a lot of really cool twists and turns and reveals, but I just kind of felt underwhelmed by a lot of it because I didn't fully feel invested in the story and in these characters and their motivations, and I just feel like everything just needed to be given more time and just needed to be fleshed out a little bit more. So yeah, I gave this 3.5 stars. I did like it. I just wish we had gotten a lot more from every aspect of this book. But that is it. Those are all 10 books that I read in the month of June. I would say this month was relatively successful, not just for the number of books that I read, but because of what I read. Of course, I had a couple of not so great reads, but I did have a new 5-star favorite, and I mean, Fourth Wing was 4.5 stars, but I'm considering that a new favorite because I also can't stop thinking about that book. I really enjoyed it. So we had some new favorites, and I also found that I was getting on my reading slump this month, and because of certain books that I read this month as well, I have found that I'm in a more fantasy mood as of lately, which hasn't happened in a while, and I'm just so happy to be in a fantasy mood. Fantasy was like my go-to genre and basically the only thing I read for a long time, so I'm happy to be back reading some fantasy because I feel like I haven't really been reading that much. So I'm really excited to see what my July wrap-up is going to look like, what I end up picking up in July. I hope there's a lot of fantasy. But yeah, let me know down below if you've made it this far into the video what your favorite book of June was, or if you didn't really have a favorite or you don't know what else to say. Leave a dragon emoji down below for Fourth Wing. Am I right? But that is going to be it for my June wrap up. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.